How's it going, everybody? I'm Clark Hellscream, and today I'm going to bring you something a little bit different. I was roaming around hsreplay's website just looking at some cards, and I thought with Ashes of Outland being rotated out pretty soon, why not look at the worst cards from the set? So today we're going to look at the lowest played win rate cards of Ashes of Outland, the top 11 worst cards of the set. And why top 11? Just because I feel like going the extra mile. So, to start off with number 11, we have Bulwark of Aggroth, a 3-mana 1/4 warrior weapon. Whenever your hero would take damage, this loses 1 durability instead. The reason why this card isn't very effective is because, especially with Demon Hunter being in the meta, there's a lot of really, not necessarily weak cards, but low-statted cards that would easily eat through this weapon in 1 to 2 turns max. So Warrior probably would be able to play this and buy themselves 1 turn, but in the later stages of the game this card just gets overwhelmingly worse. Unfortunately for Warrior, or more so for the meta, you don't see a lot of really big minions threatening every single time. So this card really doesn't have a lot of ways of being useful unless you manage a way to buff up the durabilities a lot more. And Corsair Cash may, give him +1 durability, but this really isn't the kind of weapon that you want to give a durability to. Not when Livewire, Lance, Ankar, and Wrench Caliber are so powerful in the meta. So, unfortunately for Warrior, if Control Warrior wants a good weapon, this is not the way to go. It's definitely interesting and it's definitely flavorful, so 10 for 10 on that aspect, but in terms of power level, I just don't see this card being that good. Next up is another Warrior card, believe it or not, Scrap Golem. Warrior has probably been on top of the meta since the very, very beginning of this expansion, aside from Demon Hunter being, a close second, probably even contention for first. But in any case, this card just doesn't do anything. A 5-mana 4/5 Taunt Death Rattle, gain armor equal to this minion's attack. It's just not that powerful. This card is kind of reminiscent of Sludge Belcher and not necessarily Sludge Belcher, but the 4/5 that heals you. I'm kind of blanking on the name right now. It's the tree. But in any case, this card just doesn't do a lot because there's not a lot of ways for warriors to really buff up the attack on this card without using Rampage or Inner Rage, which doesn't really fit the theme of the deck. You're also damaging a taunt minion in that process, so unless you also have the Rampage to buff it up, it's not that good. Also, magnetic cards just went out of rotation, so unfortunately for this guy, there's just not a lot of ways to really make use of the gain armor aspect, and warriors just have better ways of gaining armor with cards like Armorsmith and Risky Skipper. So when you put that in context, it kind of makes sense why this card is very low on the played win rate. So, unless we get more mechs, which is maybe possible because Hearthstone doesn't really like repeating keywords all too often, but it is possible. We might see something in the future that could support this card, but for the time being, Warrior just can't make it work. Next up, number 9, we have Blistering Rot. At the end of your turn, summon a Rot with stats equal to this minion's as a 3-mana 1/2. Again, this card is kind of reminiscent of a card from the past, like Echoing Ooze. Echoing Ooze was pretty decent if you were able to have hand buff mechanics in your deck, or if you were able to buff it while it was on the field. So it got it once and then it was done. So this is supposed to be an infinite version of that, but it's so slow. The difference between turn 2 and turn 3 in Hearthstone is so vast for a lot of decks. So the odds of you being able to play this on turn 3, have it survive, and then be able to buff it is very unlikely because dealing 2 damage between any of those turns is very likely for a lot of decks. So this minion is almost never going to stick, which means you have to be able to buff it immediately, right? So that means doing this combo on turn 5, turn 6, maybe even turn 7 if you use Blessing of Kings or something like that. People don't run Blessing of Kings, but that's just the first thing that comes to mind is Paladin buffing this card. So maybe a Paladin deck could make this work next expansion if we get any tools for that, but as of right now, this card just doesn't have enough support and is in a too fast of a meta in order to contest with other interesting mechanics. So this card needs to have other spells that work pretty well. So maybe Libram Paladin could make this work. A 3-mana 2/3 that also summons the rot with the stats. So unfortunately, it's not a copy, and you don't get another one, but you know, it's still fairly interesting. It's just not that powerful, unfortunately. Next up, we have a card that I've actually messed around with a decent amount. Soulbound Ouch, Ash Tongue as a 1-mana 1/4. Whenever this minion takes damage, your hero also takes damage equal. So, you know, this card is... it's kind of hard to justify why this card was printed in the first place, because in Warlock, it kind of made sense that you had a 2-mana 4/3 that had the same ability, but for all cards to ask for all cards to be able to run a 1-mana 1/4, it just really doesn't make too much sense. Blizzard kind of put out a lot of cards that ended up buffing minions in the early game, such as, you know, Augmentant Guardian, like all of the cards that deal 1 damage, and then like some kind of ability. There's one for spell damage, there's one for Divine Shield. It kind of makes sense that they're going for this. Maybe this is more of like an arena card, but even then, like, this card just has such a vast, huge disadvantage if you don't get it in the early game, and then suddenly it just becomes a dead card. So, like, maybe if you use, like, Faceless Corruptor or something on this minion, it becomes a little bit better. But this card is just really for memes and nothing else. Like, there's also the aspect of random evolves or random devolves, as well as, you know, summoning random 1-drops. So it kind of keeps things a little interesting, and that's probably the reason why Blizzard wanted to print this, is to have more 1-drops that have some downsides to them. So, good flavor. Again, there's probably a lot of these cards have excellent flavor, but in terms of power level, it just can't do anything because a 1-mana 1/4 is not that powerful. Like, you need to be able to make other cards to make this work, and then it's just suddenly you're making a bad deck centered around a card that doesn't really work. Next up, we have Scavenging Shevara. 6-mana 6/3 Battlecry, deal 3 damage split randomly among all other minions. So you probably already know the reason why this card is bad. It's a 6-mana 6/3. It's a demon, and its Battlecry can potentially damage your other minions as well. So unless you're literally playing this on like turn 6 against like a Rotnest Drake or something with like 6 damage and it's only that minion, then maybe you can make this card good. But even then, it's a 6-mana 6/3. I really feel like they printed this demon so that way Galakron Warlock doesn't just hit the nuts every single time. So, you know, if a 6/3 comes down on the field, it's kind of easy for your opponent to deal with. And if they can't, then you get, you know, 6 damage. So that's okay. But in terms of, like, actually running this card in your deck, it is just so weak. Like, I'm surprised it's not higher up on the list, but some of these other cards are just, they just don't have as much play rate as all the other ones. Like, this one is sitting at around 3,700 times, 3,700 times in the past 14 days, which is how we're getting our data, by the way. Thank you, hsreplay, for that. But in any case, like, this card has seen a decent amount of play compared to the other ones, and it's just like, it just gets removed so easily. It has a purpose. Maybe it has a purpose in budget decks for when people just, like, start opening these packs. But other than that, like, you're not really going to see this card active. I highly doubt in the future that this is going to see play unless you pull random demons. And even then, it's not even the demon that you want. Next up, we have Rustsorn Initiate. A 2-mana 2/2 Death Rattle, summon a 1/1 Impcaster with spell damage +1. I'm kind of surprised that there was no Warlock deck that kind of wanted to use this card, because my first instinct was, you know, you have a 2-mana 2/2 that summons, you know, a token minion that you can use to destroy to kind of help you, you know, build a board with, like, Grim Rally, or maybe you're going to use the Evil Genius that gives you, you know, 2 lackeys after you destroy a minion. So it just kind of, it's just not good enough. Like, as cool of a synergy as that is, there are cards that do that better, and the spell damage isn't worth it, and this card just doesn't have any other applications aside from maybe being like a 2-mana 2/2, unless you're, like, playing this out, playing Grim Rally onto it, and then you get a 1/1 out of it, and it's like, yeah, I can, like, Soulfire for 1 more damage. Like, Zoo just has so many other ways of blowing out the game, so this card just kind of feels irrelevant. So if it's not good in Zoo, what else can it be good? What else can it be good in? Maybe Mage? You know, there's not really a lot of decks that are very contingent on having the spell damage come out of a Death Rattle with a 2/2 on top of it. So, unfortunately, this card just isn't as good as, say, like Blood Mage, when, you know, you just play the card for spell damage, or hell, you can even put like you can put the Kobold in there. Kobold Geomancer, if I remember the card name correctly, the 2-mana 2/2 spell damage card. So, like, unfortunately for Rustthorn Initiate, the only way this card is going to see play is if Zoo plays it, and I just don't see Zoo playing it, unfortunately. Next up is a card that I kind of wish I saw more play, Infectious Sporling. A 1-mana 1/2. After this takes damage, after this damages a minion, turn it into an Infectious Sporling. This card is also pretty interesting because, you know, it's one of the only cards that actually transforms minions. And I thought it would see play because there's a lot of cards that can grant rush with Goblin Lackey being so powerful. But unfortunately for Infectious Sporling, it's not good enough to run in your deck, because in the early game, you can give your opponents Infection Sporlings, and then suddenly that just becomes an absolute an absolute clown fiesta about who has the Infectious Sporling and who's going to dictate what minions are going to get summoned. So it comes down to who has the first removal spell. But oftentimes you play this card and then your opponent just immediately removes it, so that way their minions are safe. So unfortunately, since this card can't get rush all too often and can't do it into like a really big minion, that would first make a difference. But you don't want to wait for your 1-drop to be good until the later stages of the game. You really just want your 1-drops to tempo out. Like, Hearthstone is a tempo game. So unfortunately, as cool as this card is, and as much as I kind of wanted to see this, I wanted to have this see play, it's just not that good compared to the rest of the set. Because it just, again, you can't have too many cards that rely on other aspects of your deck in order to do well. So even if you did run lackeys, you have to hit that 1 and 7 every single time you roll a lackey for this to be good. And unless you're running cards like Og Merchant Rocket that, you know, deal damage to this and give it rush, which is, again, 2 1-drops that have to synergize with cards, it's just not going to see too much play. Sitting at number 4. We're already at number 4, guys. Imagine that. Number 4 is Terrorguard Escapee. The 3-mana 3/7 demon battlecry summon 3 1/1 huntresses for your opponent. I imagine that with Druid being popular not too long ago, this was an awful idea to run near your deck. But, like, usually cards that benefit your opponent before they benefit you are really, really bad, unfortunately. So, like, this card is a prime example of what exactly that means. It's like, you're literally giving your opponent 3 1/1s. So, effectively, this is a 3-mana 3/4 if they trade everything into there. So, that's kind of the reason why this card is 3 mana and why it's balanced. But in any case, your opponent could probably just, you know, buff up the 1/1s in some manner because, you know, Druid used to run Power of the Wild. Hunter has plenty of ways of making 1/1s effective with all the other ways of them dealing chip damage. Rogue has cards like Eviscerate. And it's just like, why would you summon this card when there's better 3-drops that do absolutely nothing for your opponent? So the only other way that I can see this being good is in like some kind of wild deck, which are like Shutter Shaman. But again, this is standard, so there's not really a lot of ways to make use of these 1/1s aside from just like clearing the board in some manner. So maybe Warlock, if they play this and then have like Rain of Fire, for example, to just kill off the 1/1s, and then we have a 3/6 left over. That's a pretty decent way. But then suddenly, again, like, you can't just run this card because then you have other cards that need to support it. So in terms of flavor, it's very, very cool. But it's just not what the game needs. And, like, again, like random demons. Random demons gotta be bad for Galakron's sake. So that's probably the reason why they printed it. Every now and again, though, when you evolve it, you could get it. So that's another way this card could be good, but I'm open to other suggestions if you guys have it. Number 3, guys, is Bone Chewer Raider. Number 3, worst card. Again, Warrior, we've already talked about how good the other decks are in Warrior, and this just doesn't fit the theme. And again, another theme we've been talking about is the fact that there needs to be something else for this card to be decent. And it's like, as common as it is for Warrior to have damaged minions, why do you need a 3-mana 4/4 rush after you've already lost, after you're already behind on turn 2? Because if you have a damaged turn 2 minion, you have to trade that in or have that be traded into. So therefore, you're kind of either falling behind or you're maintaining tempo. But again, like if this is played on turn 3, it's not that powerful. Later in the game, it's really hard to fit this requirement, and it's like, why am I running this 3-mana card when, like, literally what used to happen with Livewire Lance being a 3/3 weapon essentially did the same thing and gave you a lackey. You just didn't have 4 attack. You just had 3 attack instead, but now you only have 2. So will this card see play after the Warrior nerfs? No, I don't think so. This card is just way too specific. It has too many ways of being not triggered, so it's just a 3-mana 3/3, and I'd rather run the Bloodsworn Mercenaries as a 2/2 because, you know, you can get immediate value out of those. It's not as hard. It's the same requirement, but it's so much more of a benefit. So when you compare it to that, it's hard to justify. Unfortunately, number 3 is very, very reasonable. Number 2, another meme card, actually, which I've tried a little bit in Wild, but haven't tried in Standard because I'm kind of scared of random demons in Standard. But 1-mana Shadow Council, replace your hand with random demons and give them +2/+2. Demons are probably the weakest tribe in all of Hearthstone, like over the years and just throughout history. And mainly that's due to the fact that they have such a huge downside that your opponent can often take advantage of. So does that disadvantage become better or worse with the +2/+2? There are some cards that get worse, like the ones that deal damage to your face when they get attacked into. But generally speaking, there's a lot of demons that just have underwhelming battle cries. There's Pit Lord that deals damage to your face. There's just so many demons that just aren't even worth running in your deck randomly that make this card good. So this is definitely one of those cards that probably Solemn has absolutely destroyed in terms of win rate in Wild, while Standard players are are trying this out and experiencing something very, very similar. I really don't see too many people experimenting with this card, and you definitely don't choose this card out of random discovers. So unfortunately, like, this card just doesn't have a lot of ways of being good unless you turbo hit the nuts. Like, there's just no other way for this card to be good. There's too many demons that have downsides. Ones that summon boards for your opponent, deal damage to your face, discard your own cards. The list goes on. The list goes on. Go ahead, pick a demon. It's probably bad. So random demons +2/+2. It's not that good of a backdraw. Unfortunately, it just isn't enough. And now this is probably going to be the most interesting talking point of the entire video, is the fact that Hand of Gul'dan is the the least powerful card of Ashes of Outland when played. And keep in mind, this is when played. When was the last time that you saw this card get played? Not discarded. Discarded doesn't mean played. So when you actually play this card for its face value, for 6 mana, draw 3 cards, not only are you sacrificing your entire turn, but like drawing 3 cards is just not worth 6 mana sometimes. Like, you'd rather just do this and discard a card and just make sure that you get so much value out of your 1-mana spells or out of your 2-mana minion. Like, it's just so insane whenever you discard it, you're able to get so much synergy going. But whenever you play this card, it makes sense that you're just probably not even winning. You're probably like turn 6, you played all your minions, you've exhausted all of your resources, you play this card, you're hoping that it gives you something good, that somehow you can come back, but most of the time with how Zoo is built, it's just not the case. Hand of Gul'dan makes sense at being number 1 of the worst played cards of Ashes of Outland, because you never want to play it. You want to discard it every single time. And that's going to conclude it for today's video, because, like, I mean, how else are you going to be able to make use of this, man? But yeah, we're gonna go ahead and end the video here. Thank you so much for watching, guys. If you have a question or have an opinion that you want to let me know down in the comments, I will start replying to all comments as soon as I can. And thank you so much for watching.